Good morning. Good morning. How good to see you all. Yeah. I was just walking up this morning. I come here a lot. There's a wasp nest hanging. It's like probably about this big, and it's hanging from a twig that's about maybe an eighth of an inch in diameter. And it's been there for a year, or at least, oh shoot. Losing this a little bit. Hold on. Amazing. Resilience. And softness. I mean, how light must it be? A home. Something some people built together. Pretty wonderful. Anyway. I plan to give a talk today called Bell Hooks, Love in Action. So I gave a talk about Bell Hooks, who is a person, 3 years ago, right after she had died. And I thought her wisdom at this time was timely. So I'll say a few things about bell hooks and then I have lots of quotations. I usually don't come with way too much material, but I did today. So at some point I may just be like, now we're done. So bell hooks is, you might call her a public intellectual. So she did work in academia for a lot of her career, but she published about 30 books, which were very popular and influential with a certain member of the population. I would say the easiest way to describe her, she was a pioneering intersectional feminist. So before the term intersectional feminism had been coined, she was already talking about looking at how the way our identities and the way we live in social structures impact our lives and how we impact other people. And in particular about dismantling the ways those things harm people and the way they oppress people, marginalize and exploit people. So she was also a Buddhist. So she started her Buddhist practice in the 1980s. I think she started publishing in the early 70s with an amazing book called Ain't I a Woman, which is a quotation from Sojourner Truth. Bell Hooks was a black woman who was raised in rural Kentucky. She identified as queer. She never said anything about why she was queer. She didn't appear to be lesbian. She just seemed to be like, I do not have to subscribe to the rules of gender and sexuality that seem to be pervasive, and nor do you, which is a message I appreciate. So she started her Buddhist practice in the 80s, and as a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I will be relying for this talk largely, mostly, but not universally, on quotes from articles she wrote for Tricycle and Lion's Roar magazines, which are Buddhist magazines that have been around for quite some time. So let's give a little quote here. She has a probably her most popular book is called All About Love. And in it, she says, to begin, we can always be thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling. This is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught that we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. So this is a big theme in her work, is the idea of shifting from viewing love as something that sort of happens magically to something that we do, that we embody, that we carry into the world in our way of being. And this is a theme I think she developed in part through her Buddhist exploration of Buddhism, and also she explicitly ties it to the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, who talked a lot about love. And, you know, at one point he said, at the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. King would often, because he was talking about love all the time, or a great deal, he would often, many different places, he says, I'm not talking about some kind of emotional bosh. Emotional bosh. He doesn't, this is not about sentimentality. Well, I won't, yeah. So anyway, this idea of shifting to like, what is it like to have a life of love in action? So, you know, in the Buddhist tradition, we have practices for developing metta. And sorry, I'm just having trouble getting this to settle, this microphone. Anyway, we have the idea, the practices to cultivate metta or loving kindness. And actually in a number of my recent talks, we've done a brief metta meditation. And those are ones where we really generate a feeling of care. We practice generating a feeling of care for ourselves, for other people. We challenge ourselves in those practices to generate a feeling of care for people that we have aversion towards. They're very rich and very deep. And so, you know, when I think about love in the context of Buddhism, I might immediately think of metta. But another way to think about love in the context of Buddhism is to look at the life of the Buddha and the life of his many other followers. But just to focus on when we look at the Buddhist tradition, we say this is, you know, we have an icon or a archetype for what it looks like to be a Buddha, to have attained nirvana. What happens if you realize nirvana, which Buddha claimed to have done? And what happens is you help people. That's what you do. You spend very little energy trying to get things for yourself. And in fact, in his case, almost exclusively was just like, I get up in the morning, I meditate, I beg for some food, I eat that before noon, and the rest of the day I spend either meditating, walking to another town so I can just be around some other people, or meeting the people in this area who want help. That's it. This utterly spacious love embodied in the life of practice. So Bell Hooks once wrote this enormously challenging line. The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, and pain. We risk being acted upon by forces that are outside our control. The practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, and pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside our control. I could talk about this forever. As someone who, in my life of active addiction, made enormous efforts to not be in any intimate relationships because the prospect of the pain that would be involved was so immense. It was a huge part of my practice in Zen to come here and learn to just open up to people, to support them, to be supported, to love them, to risk the pain that came with that love, which was real because they change, they do things I don't like, they die. So this is very real to me. The practice of love offers no place of safety. So this is about courage. It's about a love that is profoundly courageous, a relentless theme in Mahayana Buddhism. The Bodhisattva is someone who has gone beyond fear. Now, the biggest problem with this particular quotation is that I think a lot of people who like Zen practice have latent or overt codependent tendencies. Codependency basically meaning trying to take care of your own emotional pain by focusing on taking care of other people. Almost exclusively unconsciously. And so, you know, oh, well, the practice of love offers no place of safety. I'll just need to give myself completely. And but if what is actually happening in your own heart is occluded, unseen, if we're not mindful of it, then we're not really fully doing this, because all of that material is worthy of love as well. And actually, we need to practice courageously going towards that, which is scary for many of us. But when I read this quote, I often just think, okay, the practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, and pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside our control. And I'll ask you to really consider, is there an alternative? Can you avoid loss, hurt, and pain? Can you avoid being affected by things outside your control? All the love that she is talking about is, and all the love that non-dualistic Buddhist philosophy is pointing towards, is just acknowledging how things actually are. Just really being here with how it is. And I can say that if you look at the history of humankind, there have been unbelievable degrees of expression of this love as going beyond safety. People being willing to do things that are really difficult, scary, and hard. If you read the history of the civil rights movement of the United States, I think it's sort of, it's sort of this hazy memory with, there's an image of a dog held by a police officer leaping, biting at a man. It's terrifying. But actually, that just happens to be an image we often see. Thousands and thousands of stories of people who were to walk into very, very dangerous situations because they loved people. They wanted people to be free. They wanted to end the racism that has been such a pervasive part of our country. And were willing to risk loss, hurt, and pain. Well, this is not a myth. Love also for Hooks is like a source for where our actions can come from. And this is more like how love is often conventionally talked about or understood in Buddhist teaching. So we generate metta, and because we have this feeling of love and care for people, we're going to conduct ourselves in a loving, caring way. But she has this line, I don't remember where this one is from. Our willingness to accept responsibility for the elimination of racism need not be engendered by feelings of guilt, victimization, moral responsibility, or rage. Our willingness to accept responsibility for the elimination of racism need not be engendered by feelings of guilt, victimization, moral responsibility, or rage. Where is it coming from? It can just come from loving people, caring, seeing how racism harms people. And she's talking explicitly about racism in this case, which is really important. But more broadly speaking, we can find that when we look at suffering in the world, instead of being like, oh, I'm responsible, I guess I got to help out, or, these bastards are getting me, or I'm so pissed, or, oh, geez, I guess I'm complicit. I'm a terrible person. You can just be like, look, I can open my eyes and see that there is harm and suffering in this. And I can do something because I care about people being harmed. I care about people suffering, including me and everyone else, and all the animals, all the wasps. I don't know. So I'll read you another kind of longer quote. I think this is a longer one. Oh, yes. Hooks writes, when I began, years ago now, to focus on the power of love as a healing force, no one really disagreed with me. Yet what they continue to accept in their daily lives is lovelessness, because doing the work of love requires resisting the status quo. So this probably, lovelessness might be kind of strong. I mean, I think everybody, hopefully, has some love in their life. And then they could have more. They could both manifest it more and they could receive it more. So, but, her rhetoric is powerful here. Because what she's saying is like, if we see how much harm and suffering is in the world there is, and we just kind of complacently go, oh yeah, well, I guess that's how it is. There's a lovelessness there. There's a lack. We're missing some opportunity and some capacity to be more beautifully engaged in our lives and in our communities. So this aligns deeply with a sutra from the Anguttara Nikaya, which is one of the 5 really large bodies of text from the earliest layer of Buddhism, the Pali Canon. And in the Anguttara Nikaya, there's a sutra. It's often called, they don't have titles, but people call it the Against the Stream Sutra. And in that, Buddha basically says to do the Eightfold Path is to go against the stream. And basically the metaphor is the stream is all the enormous amounts of conditioning human beings have that cause suffering. And like, oh my gosh, if I had a lot of my own, I had terrible interpersonal habits, I had the aforementioned addiction. I like invent new ones every few years. So I got that. You have this kind of internal tendencies, and then we have these, how they manifest in a collective sense. We have systems that are incredibly damaging to the other species on our planet and to people in other countries which are profoundly impoverished and are exploited for their resources, both human and physical and so forth. So there's so much stream energy that harms people. And the Buddha's like, if you are doing the Eightfold Path, you should not be going along with that stream. You should be going the other way. And why do you have the metaphor? Because it's hard. Have you noticed sometimes it's hard? That's the only reason he has that metaphor. It's like, oh, could I just like lie down here? And I will say there's lots of other Buddhist imagery that would be like, just be in the stream. Just be like a rock, the stream flows around. That's all good too. That's all good too. It's just another side of things. But here, the acknowledgement is that love does call people to challenge patterns, move against them actively, and it can be hard. Just no show of hands, but how many people have been involved in Zen practice for quite a few years who've had moments where you're like, I think maybe I'm done. This is hard. Okay, maybe. How many people this morning? No, just kidding. Okay, so so then she goes on. She says, doing the work of love requires resisting the status quo. She says, in Thich Nhat Hanh's most recent treatise on the subject, True Love, A Practice for Awakening the Heart, he reminds us that to love in the context of Buddhism is above all to be there. He then raises the question of whether or not we have time for love. Right now, there is such a profound cultural awareness that we need to practice love if we are to heal ourselves and the planet. The task awaiting us is to move from awareness to action. The practice of love requires that we make time, that we embrace change. Fundamentally, to begin the practice of love, we must slow down and be still enough to bear witness in the present moment. So I suspect you're aware that that's a big part of what we're doing here at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. And we have many contexts for just slowing down. So we have Zazen, we have walking meditation, we have services in the mornings, we have Soji cleaning, both every weekday morning and then, well, not Fridays. And then we have work practice days. We have Dokusan, meeting one-to-one, retreats, which are an opportunity to really dive in. All of these things are really to give us a context and a reminder to just bring ourselves to what is here. But this also includes, in my opinion, being aware of what is here. Like, it's good to read the newspaper. There's some things that are here that you can read about in the newspaper that are harming a lot of people. And we can do something about it, which is a theme I'll get to in a minute. So Bell Hooks writes, linking Buddhism with social engagement, Thich Nhat Hanh's work attracted Westerners like me precisely because he offered a spiritual vision of the universe that promoted for working for peace and justice. And this is, Mahayana Buddhism. It doesn't necessarily talk about justice. That's actually a very complicated topic that I'm not getting into. But insofar as injustice causes harm, then it's very explicit. Very explicit. So, a spiritual vision of the universe. And this is, if you have ever been to a talk here or read some Buddhist text and you're like, God, this is confusing and bizarre and mind-boggling. All that philosophy that we have in Mahayana Buddhism is pointing towards realizing a universe where love and peace are valuable and possible, and there's a way to work for them. It may be hard to see that sometimes. You might be like, I don't get this. But that's what they're for. And for those of us, if you are like me, who've been profoundly inspired by Thich Nhat Hanh, who she cites repeatedly, he's a Vietnamese monk who died a few years ago, but was very, very influential, nominated for the Nobel Prize by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That vision that he had was deeply rooted. He understood and studied in a very concentrated way Mahayana Buddhist philosophy and looked at it as a way to start to see the universe in a way where we can really feel our capacity to collectively engage in practices that liberate us from suffering. So this whole thing of social engagement and Mahayana Buddhism, I am fixing to spend a bunch of time with it and perhaps with some of you, because during the practice period, which is coming up starting in April, we're going to be studying the Gandavyuha, which is Gandavyuha Sutra, which really, you could do a lot of things with it, but one of the main things is all these different kinds of great Buddhist teachers who are doing all these different kinds of ways of helping people getting free. Some of them are like giving Dharma talks or meditating a lot, but some of them are just like feeding people or touching people in a healing manner or helping people see through their hang-ups about sexuality or freeing people from prison or challenging powerful political figures. So I think it will be fun. And I will say, if you're interested in the practice period, please make sure that you look at the requirements for the practice period and that you can do them. I would love to be there with you, but it is good if everyone comes and they're ready to actually do the thing, because it's about collectively building some energy. So let's see, my next section. I write my talks almost always the same way. I have headings that I talk about for 5 or 10 minutes. And this next one, I don't usually tell you the headings. This one is called Love as an Antidote to Despair. And I think maybe I want to say that out loud. Love as an antidote to despair. And, you know, I hear a lot of people who are kind of freaked out and sometimes despairing about what is happening in the United States, particularly at the level of the federal government, with some pretty extremely, I think, harmful things happening. So Bell Hooks writes, when lecturing on ending domination around the world, listening to the despair and hopelessness, I asked individuals who were hopeful to talk about what force in their life pushed them to make a profound transformation, moving them from a will to dominate toward a will to be compassionate. The stories I heard were all about love. As a transformative power, love was also present in the narratives of individuals working to create loving personal relationships. Writing about metta, love or loving kindness, as the first of the Brahma Viharas, the heavenly abodes, Sharon Salzberg, who's an insight meditation teacher. Sharon Salzberg reminds us in her insightful book, Loving Kindness, the revolutionary art of happiness, the revolutionary art of happiness. She reminds us that in cultivating love, we remember one of the most powerful truths the Buddha taught, that the forces of the mind that bring suffering are able to temporarily hold down the positive forces such as love or wisdom, but they can never destroy them. Love can uproot fear or anger or guilt because it is a greater power. Love can go anywhere. Nothing can obstruct it. Oh, I just remember this really nice quote from Maya Angelou. Love recognizes no barriers. It jumps fences, leaps hurdles, and penetrates walls to arrive at its destination full of hope. So I just had a meeting here a couple days ago with my friend Emily Goldthwaite, who is the director for organizing for vegan interfaith housing. And they organize religious congregations to provide supportive housing for people. Supportive housing is basically housing that helps people get from homelessness into housing and stay in housing. And this is a great organization. They built like 30 big buildings and work with community really closely. And I just love them. And she's great. And boy, she just had no time for despair. None. I would kind of want to direct the conversation over to something other than how awesome it was to help people have housing. And she wasn't like, I'm not willing to talk to you, but she was just like, energy. I meet so many people like this, that because they're actively engaged in doing things that help people, they feel good. Also, sometimes we feel completely exhausted. And then we can get together and love each other and care for each other and support each other. Oh, I don't know. Look at the wall. Oh, the walls. The walls are so non-dramatic. When was the last time you were sitting zazen and the wall came out and hurt you? Never happens. They're very loving, very simple. They're so good at being present. I don't think we talk enough about how zazen is like an opportunity to just like looking at a really good example. Just being there. Thanks, wall. Thank you, cup. So this idea of sort of faith and love and energy and going beyond despair, there's a lot of Mahayana philosophy to feed this. When Dogen is in the opening line of the universal recommendation for Zazen, this is kind of like, this is why you should practice Zazen. It starts it begins, the way is originally perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent on practice and realization? When Dogen is talking about the way, he's talking about all the most wonderful things that Buddhism says are possible. Compassion, wisdom, spaciousness, kindness, skillfulness. He's like, this is already perfect and all-pervading everywhere. That's why you should practice. And I'm aware that's maybe too confusing. But at bottom, it's pointing to the same thing that Bell Hooks is pointing at here, when she's talking about Sharon Salzberg, which is that we can, in any moment, just realize that love and compassion is available, and it's bigger and more expansive than whatever it's viewing. Bell Hooks writes, to commit to love is fundamentally to commit to a life beyond dualism. That's why love is so sacred in a culture of domination, because it simply begins to erode your dualisms. And, I've used quotes that use the term domination. For Hooks, Oftentimes, you know, we might use a term like violence, we might use a term like harm, we might use a term like control, domination. These are not identical. You know, violence seems kind of at a more extreme end. But basically, she's talking about the tendency of to look at the world and go, well, how can I get what I want from this? At the most fundamental level, which is a very basic Mahayana idea. Now, she might be talking more extreme, like when you're trying to really actively control people, or you know, you're willing to try and get what you want in a way that's extremely extractive or harmful. But at bottom, that's the idea, and love is an antidote to that tendency. So instead of thinking like, okay, the universe is like this, how can I get what I want? We just think, oh, the universe is like this. How can I offer something that would help there be less suffering? I think the second one feels better. And more empowering. I think I want to do a brief little meditation practice, a little guided meditation practice here. So if you like to have a particular way of sitting, you can. This will just be like 3 or 4 minutes. Oh, just inviting you to let your attention settle in the breath, foundation of mindfulness. Knowing what is here. So just take a moment to see, however is natural for you, to just kind of call up a sense of caring and loving. Maybe just kind of thinking in your mind, oh, may all beings be happy and at peace. Or if it's easier, just thinking of someone that you really love and care about and wishing that they may be happy and at peace. You can use imagination, visualization, words. May you be happy and at peace are pretty good. I'm just going to invite you to think of something that you have thought about doing that would be beneficial in a very broad sense. Could be something like donating money somewhere, or sending a letter to a political figure, or going to a meeting to talk about stemming climate change, or going to visit your elderly relative in the nursing home. It's something you've thought about doing, but maybe haven't done quite as much as might be possible. And then I'm just going to invite you to imagine yourself doing this activity and being very aware of and focused on doing it because you have this love, this sense of wanting people to be well, to be happy and at peace. You can just let all that imagining go and just notice how you feel. Notice the breath in the body. Whatever feeling is there, just notice it with some care. Might be a nice feeling, might be a difficult one. That's okay. And I'm going to invite you to open your eyes and just shift your attention back to the more conventional way of listening to someone talking and being in a group of people. So, I'm just going to do this part kind of briefly. One thing about love is that it helps us to develop it by looking at kind of the contents of our own thinking and our own feeling so that we can kind of see where we may have tendencies that are not very loving. Mindfulness is largely, it is described in early Buddhist practice, is largely just seeing what's the contents of mind and being like, oh, that's not beneficial. And being like, all right, I see you and you can move on. That's like that. Pretty simple. So just seeing. And, then there are, you'll see Buddhist discourse about like sitting down and talking to people about things that you're doing that aren't helpful and kind of learning to let go of them, being challenged about them by other people, meeting your teacher and talking about them and working through them. So this is really powerful. And, talking about bell hooks, I would feel kind of appropriative if I talked this long about bell hooks and didn't really talk explicitly about feminism. So I just want to read a section which is about this internal investigation as a way of transforming the systemic context that you're in. So I'll read this section. She says, "My militant commitment to feminism remains strong. And the main reason is that feminism has been the contemporary social movement that has most embraced self-interrogation. When we, women of color, began to tell white women that females were not a homogeneous group, that we had to face the reality of racial